everyone. Let's wrap up November. November didn't see any videos of me apart from October wrap up. And that's because November is busy at work. I didn't sleep. I had a really bad bout of insomnia. I always sleep bad, but for the first few weeks of November, I hardly slept at all. And so my mind wasn't anywhere in a functioning state of anything. So at some point, I don't even remember what I did or could put together sentences. Still struggling with that, as you can notice. So I am still tired, but I'm sleeping a little bit more on the normal side of my sleep schedule, which is still far off of normal sleep that would make you feel relaxed and rested. But anyways, I'm getting more sleep. Then on top of all of that, being sleep deprived as hell, I had a lot of toothache. So I've been having trouble for months, but it's hard to point out where the pain comes from. So by now, at the end of the month, I think I figured out which tooth is the problem. But during the months, I was on pain meds and antibiotics and in pain a lot. So that also affected November. So yes, I had a lot of fun on top of November being cold, gray, and dark. Let's talk about the happier things. Not sleeping had me read a lot. Of course, not complex, interesting things. So a lot of the things I didn't connect with the stories as much as more on the emotional side. So let's start and talk about the books I read and start with audiobooks first for a change. I listened to Prophet, and this is a rather complex story set in, I think, in the present. I don't actually know if it's a future setting, but it is following these two men who are trying to solve a mystery. There are things appearing somehow and a lot of complex things. Like I said, I can't really sum up the story, but it was really fascinating to follow. This one character could look at things and know if they're real or not. And the other character is some soldier person. And they have worked as a team together in the past, and now they have been lumped together to do that again. And this Prophet is a material that when you come in contact with, you can materialize things, and it's evolving and changing all the time. I don't know if it's a thriller or a mystery, but it is trying to solve this, and they are trying to get behind all of the government institutions working with this. But what I really enjoyed the audiobook. It was probably not a book that I could have managed reading this month, but listening to it was okay. And what I mostly liked was the interaction between those two characters, learning about their past lives or past interactions and events through flashbacks, but also following them along and seeing their relationship to each other, how they worked as friends and colleagues and all those things. So that's what I was drawn to most in the book. But I really think you can go into it for the plot points, for the actual thing that the Prophet does a lot more with more mind space than I had in November. So I highly recommend the book, even though I couldn't summarize it at all. Then my Audible app recommended Starter Villain to me. I hadn't known or realized that John Scalzi had put out a new book, and it was narrated by Will Wheaton, which I always like. So I went into it straight, of course blind, and I loved it. John Scalzi has a way of writing and telling stories that Will Wheaton brings to life in a way that always has me laugh out loud. So I was walking around laughing out loud a lot, listening to this story of this young man having basically come to a low point in his life and then figuring out that his uncle died, whom he hadn't had contact in years, and that somehow he was the head of a real big business that wasn't parking lots as he always thought, but basically villainy and a lot of things to do with that. And he inherited it, and there's a lot of cats that are sentient. I really enjoyed it. Summing up the plot is way too complicated for me. This was fun for the writing, for the story, and definitely for the narration. Highly recommend if you like anything that John Scalzi has put out before. And then, of course, in November, the next Murderbot Diaries installment came out, book 7, System Collapse. And there, I must say, I had a little trouble connecting with the book because we find Murderbot still in the after effects of Network Effect. So I highly recommend that you brush up on the content of Network Effects before you go into this book, because it's relying heavily on what happened there. And Murderbot is a little bit traumatized in the beginning, and I was in a mind space where I connected to the traumatic responses that he had. And so I don't really know what happened much. Well, I kind of got the gist of the story, but it's the seventh book in a series, so how am I to summarize that without putting in spoilers? But I could follow the story, but for the detailed descriptions of what actually happened, I have to listen to it again, which is no problem because I've listened to all of the Murderbots before multiple times, so that will be easy, but I need to be in a better space than I was now. In case you don't know, because you're new here, the Murderbot Diaries are a series of books following a human bot construct that works or was designed to be a security unit. It was controlled by a governor module, something in his brain that the company could control it with and make it do whatever it wanted them to do or what they wanted it to do and do its job. But Murderbot hacked it, and so now is trying to find a purpose in life, following some ideas, still working as a security unit. And throughout the 7 books, we get to know it better and its motivations and all the things. Mostly it wants to watch media. I highly recommend it in case that wasn't clear. I love the Murderbot Diaries. The last book I basically tried because I looked through my wish list on Audible and there were a lot of books that were available or in the Plus catalog right now. So I thought I'll give them a try. And if I don't like them, I'll just discard them without spending money on it. And one of those was Kill All the Normies, which I had to DNF mostly because I was in a everything sucks, the world is horrible, people suck, and nobody's nice anymore mood. And then Kill All the Normies looks at the way that the internet has trolls and the effects it has, and 4chan and the Trump era. And I was just getting depressed and thinking humanity should just die and burn. So I stopped that to not go down that road. The book is probably good, but I wasn't the right audience at that point. I only read one physical book all November, and I only just finished it in December, but I'm going to include it here because I forget what it was about otherwise. And it was actually a nonfiction book, The Monk of Mokha by Dave Eggers. And if you know me, Dave Eggers and I have a very good connection in that I always like his writing. I picked the book up not being aware that this is a nonfiction. I thought it was a fun novel. It looked sparkly. I liked the cover, and I always like his writing. So I started reading it, and I was like, this doesn't sound like a novel. This sounds more real. And it is. It is a story of a young Yemeni American who wants to import coffee, Yemeni coffee, who wants to import coffee from Yemen to America and help the Yemen coffee producers to make more money. So the book basically tells you a lot about the person, but you also learn a lot about coffee trade that I didn't know about, the 3 different stages of coffee and the specialty coffee market. I just like coffee. I don't need to pay 20 euros for a cup of coffee or something. I'm just not in that space, but it was very interesting to read about it. And also it was interesting to follow this story of this young man who really had a lot of trouble because while he was trying to get a grip on this market and start there, there was also war in Yemen. So it was interesting. There was a lot of historical background, a lot of the person. I would describe it as an American dream story with a lot of fuck ups and faking it. And it somehow worked. But what really dragged me or kept me reading was not just the story, but the way the story was told. Because Dave Eggers, I pick up the books, whatever he writes about, I'm just drawn in and click with his writing. I can't put it down. I'm immediately in a different world. I don't know how he does it, but it's happened with every other book. So if you're interested in coffee, give this a go. Then let's go into the Insomniac reading. I basically bought random books at night on my Kindle. I was only reading on Kindle, and when I finished a book, I just clicked on the next thing that was recommended. So let's start off with the most reasonable book that I had on my wish list and tried it because of that. Several people typing. And this works well when you can't sleep because it's basically just Slack messages, so no long complex texts or anything to follow. The story is there is this one man who one day finds himself being caught and trapped in Slack, this messaging system thing. My company never used it, so I'm not really familiar with it, but it's just like any other messaging system I think that existed. And it's in the company, they have different groups and different people chatting. And in the beginning, the people always think it's a bit and he's just pretending to be locked in there. And the story progresses. It's rather fun to read. It's super fast paced because of the short message style of the writing. The events that evolve are hilarious and the company feels a little bit strange. But anyways, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anyone who needs light reading and fast-paced books. And maybe get yourself out of a slump because long, complicated texts are too much for you right now. It's good for that. Then I read Smoke Signals, which is another book by an author that I had. One book I liked, one book I didn't like, but I thought, why not give it a try? It was just a little bit over 80 pages and it was fun, I guess. I'm not sure. I found myself in the genre of dragon romance, apparently. I didn't know that was a thing. But we follow this young man who's working at a company and is sort of in the computer helpline, people calling, and he fixes things. And then there's, for some reason, dragons in this world, and this one dragon hoards games. So he learned about online games and computer games that you can only buy online, and he wants someone to install them all for him. And so the helper guy needs to go to his mansion and install the 8,000 games they have and do that. And with that, a story or a relationship unfolds where there is a lot of flirting, but both of them don't realize they're flirting with each other, and then the story resolves. When it comes to plot, not a lot is happening. I'm not usually a romance reader because I need more to a book than romance. But this month, apparently, I read a lot of romance because this was heavily focused on them getting together and the rest was just background. I usually prefer my romance to be the background. But anyways, the story really addressed power dynamics and differences there and being clingy or not clingy, what demands and consent and how to talk about that. That was all well done. So I highly enjoyed it. From that book, my recommendations brought me to Fated Mates and Where to Find Them, which is a vampire romance that starts off with a blood auction where humans can auction themselves off to vampires to be their sex and feeding slaves or something like that. And this also addresses power dynamics and being clingy and falling in love and all these things and a lot of sex. If I didn't mention that, Smoke Signals also had a lot of sex. So those were explicit books on the sex. If you don't like that, just skip that. But the stories and the writing was rather well done. I was very surprised how well the topic of power dynamics and relationships were dealt with. So I enjoyed this one, much to my surprise. And then the reading recommendations went a little bit weird. I ended up reading the first 4 chapters, which are 4 separate novellas, of I Went on an Adventure and all I got was this Barbarian orc. I basically had enough of reading about sex at that point and was trying to read something that was short and fast-paced and adventurous, where I didn't matter what the story was about. Turned out orcs are the greatest lovers around, so I didn't get the less sex part. But I got an adventure part. This story follows a group of people around an orc and a necromancer. Those two are narrating the stories alternatingly, and it is really well done. The story focuses a lot on the relationship between the group of people. It has a lot of role play feeling to it, and they go from one adventure to another. Basically, the necromancer is the prince of the kingdom, and the kingdom is currently experiencing women attacking their husbands or men, and so they are trying to find out what is happening. And there was some, let's say, some dark shady magic floating around that the necromancer can see sometimes if he does something, and they're trying to find the source of it. So they're going around the country adventuring and having relationships and a lot of sex. And yeah, it's also really interesting how well it is done on the different types of combinations of relationships and how things are addressed there. So What I learned this month is that in the fantasy settings, there is apparently a lot more going on about consent and different types of relationships and how people really can work along with each other respectfully in relationship parts. Really well done. So that surprised me. I hadn't come across that in this extent before. So that it was really like hitting me on the head that the writing is really focusing on consent and power dynamics and different ways people can have relationships. Unfortunately, the story with the orc is not finished. There's a 5th chapter coming along, so I have no idea how the story ends, but so far it was a nice adventure story. Now that I'm sleeping more, I'm getting a little bit tired of all the sex. So I dived into something completely different, or completely different is the wrong word. I have always eyed the beautiful covers of Heaven Official's Blessing in the bookstore. And when I finished the last chapter of the Orc Adventure, I was so tempted to read something else. So I gave in to the Kindle version and started reading Heaven Official's Blessing. I finished book 1 and 2 already, and I must say, this is a sweet spot where I am just currently in that it's, I want to say fantasy, but it's following Chinese mythology of a heavenly realm, a mortal realm, and the ghost realm. We follow a god and a ghost, sort of. We're not following the ghosts, but they are intertwined with the story a lot. But so far in the first and the second book, there are the introductions to the characters that are going on. We meet our god who has ascended for the 3rd time because he descended and fell from godhood, apparently. And things happened that are just mentioned, but not really gone into detail in the first 2 books. The 3rd book is currently dealing with a major flashback and what happened in the past, how he ascended and all of that. So that comes in the 3rd book. But I finished the first 2, and what I really enjoyed about the writing, or about these books, well, the writing just flows. It's very simple to follow, so good for my sleep-deprived brain. It also follows adventures and really stories that I enjoy in general anyway, so it's my sweet spot because it has a supernatural element with the ghosts and the gods and the mortal realm and the longevity and all of the things, and it also has a clear focus on friendship and soulmates and all of that. So I know that it is a side effect of Danmai that has no sex because of censorship, but I find it rather refreshing that I can get this focus on the friendship and the relationship between the characters without having to read pages and pages of explicit sex scenes. Just boring. How often can you read that? Maybe you like it. I don't know. I don't care, actually. But since I find that tedious in a lot of the fantasy romance books, I do like the friendship side of people coming together and having relationships, but I do want to have the focus on the plot and the story and other things. And this is working out really, really well. The downside is that there are 8 books I have to read now. So who knows? I kind of want to finish them in December. I'm not really sure if I can do that. We'll see. Let me just check if I forgot a book. No, that was all my November reading. As you can tell, I have trouble talking about the books a little bit, but I did enjoy my reading. Despite being sleep deprived and reading most of the night, I got a lot of fun reading out of it that I probably wouldn't have picked up any other way. So December has 2 more weeks of work for me, and then I am off till January. I hope to sleep a lot in that time, and I hope to read a lot. So we'll see what December brings. Let me know what you read in November, if you have had a good reading month or bad reading months. How are your plans for December? Do you have any things you really, really want to finish? Like I said, I would like to read the last 6 books of the Heaven Officials. So we'll see how that goes. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Let's talk in comments, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.